Mic check 1, 2, 3. This is the AwokenWord podcast, and I'm your host, Anuj Mugabi. It's been a minute, or a few. It's 2023, and I'm sure some or many of you have been wondering, where the hell did he go? What's up with the podcast? All I can say is that in that time since we last connected, I've moved. I had to reset up the whole studio, and along the way, all of the other amazing things in life, a growing family, kids that keep us on our toes, and a world that is as crazy as it's ever been. On top of all that, I really needed to reflect and recalibrate on what I want to share in this podcast and what form I want it to take. So that process is still ongoing. All of that said, I do have some great news in that I finally have a new episode for you, which is kind of a lie because it's not really a new episode. This was a conversation that I actually recorded a few years ago, and I was actually quite heartbroken to find that when I started to put this together, the audio from the recording and from that conversation had been lost, or so I believed. After moving and resetting up the studio and going through all my hard drives and all my backups, I actually found the backup of a backup that I didn't realize that I had. From that, I was able to rescue most of the audio of the conversation. Not all, but most. And although this conversation is old in terms of when it happened, it's new in that it's as timely as ever today. It doesn't take into account some of the recent events that have happened in the world. This was obviously a pre-COVID conversation, so that doesn't show up. Now, I'm really pleased that of all the conversations to pick back up on with the podcast, it happens to be this one. My guest in this episode is Mugabi Byenka. Mugabi is an author, a poet, an occasional rapper. You'll find out in the conversation what occasional rapper means. We actually cover a whole bunch of ground on everything from the process of being a creative, on digging deep to find out what story you actually want to tell. We talk about what it's like walking a mile in his shoes. So what is it like to be a black man in different parts of the world? I would say that Mugabi is a bit of an international man of mystery. He's lived in 8 different countries, and keep in mind that was at last count back when this was recorded. It's been some years since I've seen him, and I imagine that number may have actually increased since then. We talk a lot about health and some of the challenges in life and in health that Mugabi has faced, and yet I think you'll find it was a humbling experience. I was certainly humbled to kind of hear from him about his level of gratitude and his positivity and his perspective on being thankful for all that he does have, and in being thankful for all the good days. As you'll hear pretty soon into this conversation, Mugabi has one of the most curious and interesting laughs you may ever hear in your life. I know that's a big statement to make, but trust me, it's worth hearing. And for all those who have reconnected and perhaps are surprised, maybe even pleasantly, that this episode is showing up in your app, thank you for being there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the support, and thank you for the patience. I now give you my conversation with Mugabi Byenka. This podcast is my humble attempt to bring a full grain of sand of goodness to the beach of human experience. Inspiring. This podcast is my love letter to all of you. All right, here we are in Toronto. I am with the man himself, Mugabi Byenka. Am I saying that right?
Byenka.
Byenka.
There you go.
I wasn't sure.
All good.
So, Mugabi, you're a writer and a poet and an occasional rapper. Now, I don't know if that means you rap on occasion, you rap for occasions. What is an occasional rapper?
I say an occasional rapper is someone who raps. I guess both both on occasions and occasionally. I used to take my rapping a lot more seriously, and I used to like consider myself a rapper. But honestly, the whole reason behind my rapping was to like earn my older brother's respect, who is a rapper and who's like an amazingly talented rapper. And the minute that I had like earned his respect and he was like, yo, you're actually pretty good at this, like why don't you open for me for a show, I was like, what's the point of me continuing to rap if like I've achieved what I wanted to? And so nowadays I only occasionally rap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And have you kept the respect, or?
Yes, I have kept the respect. No, yeah. He actually wants me to feature on a track or two of his, because like I still do it, you know. I just don't do it publicly anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So now I'm a lot more of a silent, quiet to myself rapper.
Okay.
Yeah.
More of an inner rapper.
Exactly. Because I haven't publicly released any music in a while, but I've been rapping.
So we met, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Something like
at
that.
Shabashir.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was a night you were featuring or a night I was featuring at Banu's show.
I think we met the night you were featuring, and then I think you came back for the night I was featuring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know I'd seen you perform, and you're kind of hard to forget between those the glasses, which we were just talking about, and the signature laugh. I'm glad that you're finally here, because this has been kind of a minute in the making.
Yeah. No.
So, who are you? Like, I see you as a writer and occasional rapper, and I've seen that you're kind of floating between countries at points. International man of mystery, we were kind of talking about here, and then you kind of dropped this out of the blue mention that you used to live in Dhaka. Who the hell are you? What makes you Mugabi?
What makes me? Eesh, that's a loaded question. I would say, at the very bare bones of it, Mugabi, the name means the giver. And so my ancestors, meaning my grandmother, like gave me that name, and she like said that I was predispositioned towards being a generous individual, and that like for some reason she could just tell when I was a baby that like I was going to be generous. And I don't know what that means, because like it's hard to like call myself generous, because I don't really see myself in that way, but a couple people do. And so in terms of like who I am and what makes me tick, it's honestly other human beings and like animals and plants and loved ones. And I have been given a lot by this world, and I have been also stripped away. A lot has been stripped away from me. And so I just try my level best to even the playing field wherever I can possible, for those people who have less than others. And I try my best to leverage whatever I've been given to aid those who have not been given as much, and to try to fight for the rights of those who have not been given as much, and to just try to live my life as lovingly and as positively as possible, I guess.
That's not something that you hear nearly enough about right now in a very kind of tumultuous, polarized time. We live in a different time, or maybe every generation says that they live in a different time. We're in a place right now where we have more access to technology, more access to each other, more access to people, and yet we're in many ways more isolated than we've ever been. And it's this weird paradox that we've kind of found ourselves in. And I'm a little bit older than you, just old enough to remember going to a library when you needed to write an essay, remembering a world where not everyone had cell phones and you didn't know where everyone was, 24/7. And in some ways, it's easy to romanticize that era, but there's also a lot of trade-offs. Like, it's pretty awesome to be able to connect with somebody across the world today, like in a split second, over whether it's social media or YouTube, or to, know that the person that, you love, their flight has landed or they've reached wherever they want to reach. So we've got this kind of weird mix of things. From what little I know about you, you've had obviously some challenges and tribulations in your life, and yet you're a really positive person. And I'm curious, like, why you meet some people and despite everything that they've gone through, or perhaps because of everything that they've gone through, they are the sort of positive spirits that they are. what have been some of the challenges that you've come across that, like, if you were to think about, in my life, I've been given all of this great stuff, but where is that takeaway that you mentioned?
In terms of my life, I mean, there have been multiple takeaways. And one of those, like, as much as I hate to call it a takeaway, it is a massive takeaway in, like, today's society is being born Black, you know? Because like I love my Blackness, and I'm super proud of being Black, and I'm super, very, very happy that I am the person that I am. But we live in a world where whiteness is seen by a lot of people as superior to Blackness, and is, like, on the racial hierarchy, like, superior to Blackness, not inherently superior, but superior in terms of, like, the way society views it, right? Yeah. You know, like, I'm not saying white people are better than Black people.
Just for the record.
I'm not a KKK, sympathizer. No white power in here. But
I'm glad we cleared that.
Yes. But, like, I mean, I know the way I move through the world, and, like, I've lived in a bunch of different places that are predominantly Black, places that are not predominantly Black. And in every single place that I've lived in, I've been treated as an inferior because of my Blackness. And so, like, that is, like, one of, like, the ways that, like, I have been, like, marginalized in this world. Outside of that, I'd say my two main, like, tragedies in life in terms of, like, personal things that I faced was... So I had 3 strokes over the course of my life, one when I was 9 and 2 when I was 22. And those massively changed the ways that I move through the world. My first stroke paralyzed the right side of my body completely. So I couldn't move my hand or my legs or even, like, my right eye or the right side of my mouth. And I was, like, bedridden for a couple of months and, like, going through physical therapy, going to doctors, trying to get it figured out. Everyone was like, we don't know what happened to you because you're 9, like, strokes normally happen in people who are 60 plus with, like, 40 years of smoking under their belt. And I was a 9-year-old. I never, most 9-year-olds have never touched a cigarette. And I had never touched a cigarette, Right. I was just playing with my friends, just living my best life. And so, like, the doctors said I was going to die by the end of the year. And so I was, like, my parents were wrestling with that and trying to figure out what I was going through. And they were shielding me from a lot of, like, the mental and emotional effects of, like, the fact that I just had a stroke. And they were all like, oh, no, it's going to get better. Don't worry. Just, like, do what the doctors tell you to, which I'm grateful for. Because at 9 years old, I wasn't able to handle, the fact that, oh, the doctors said I was going to die by the end of a year, And then my dad died when I was 13, which was another huge, like, shock because we were all really close. And with my dad dying meant my family's position in terms of, like, financial and socioeconomic class went with him because it was a single income household. Completely different social circumstance, like having to share a bedroom with 7 people, cockroaches, rats, snakes. Like, it was very, very different from what I was used to. And then I had 2 more strokes when I was 22, which massively shifted things as well. And
were those, like, in succession? Were those close to each other? Like,
within a week of each other, yeah. Yeah, which is why like I lump them together. Like, currently I walk with a slight limp, but, like, walking is even, like, a huge achievement because I couldn't walk for a while. I was in a wheelchair.
Limp,
yeah,
I've seen you. That's straight up swag.
Thank you. My friends used to call me the pimp with a limp. But yeah, I've been through a lot. I mean, like, even though, like, I'm usually smiling and happy because I think, like, one of the reasons that I'm so grateful is because I've been in a lot worse positions than I am right now. And so I'm always grateful that I am able to do something more than what I used to be able to do, or more than what I am able to do, like, on an average week, right? And so, like, my health fluctuates from day to day, from week to week, because, like, strokes, brain damage is very complicated. Like, it's very difficult to treat and very difficult to stabilize. And so, for example, Monday, literally 2 days ago, I had, like, a ridiculous seizure, and I was out of commission for most of Monday. And then Tuesday, woke up, went to another seizure. And so I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it to this interview. But then today I woke up and I was like, oh, like, I'm actually, like, the seizure like hangover and the fugue and everything that it puts my body through like has dissipated. So like I'm good to go. The way that my health fluctuates just teaches me that, you know, like shouldn't take things for granted. And it's like I might be down Monday, Tuesday, and then it's like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm good. So I'm just going to try to do everything that I can during that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because I don't know how long it's going to last.
Have they ever been able to find the underlying cause for the strokes?
For the strokes and the various complications, they have a couple theories, but they're not 100% sure on the underlying cause, because basically what the doctors explain, I've been to like over 100 different doctors in my life because it's been a complicated case. And what they've explained to me is that like whatever I'm dealing with is something that they're doing research in right now. And they're hoping to have like answers for me maybe like 50 years down the line. But like, it's one of those things that like the human brain is beyond medical knowledge currently.
Right.
And whatever I'm dealing with is one of those things that like hopefully with research and with, you know, like applications, they will have some answers down the line. But right now what they can tell me is there's one of the blood vessels in my brain that does a weird loop that it's not supposed to. They're not sure why that is. They could go in and, you know, like operate on it and get further answers, but there'd be an 80% chance of death. And so I'm like, nah, you know, like those odds don't look very friendly to me. And they're like, yeah, you know, like well, we just wanted to present the option. And I'm like, why would you even present that option? Like 20% chance of survival. Like I would rather survive as I am right now, you know? And they're like, but we could get answers. And I'm like, what's more important? Answers or my life? And for quite a few doctors, answers is more important, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, it's one of those things that they said there's something going on with the neurotransmitters and something going on with the blood as it's pumping through my brain. They're not sure exactly what, but they're hoping to have some answers. But I might be gone by then, so we'll see.
Wow, there's a lot in there. I'm actually a little surprised that you started with the first takeaway as blackness. I didn't really expect that to be the place to start, or even a place at all. You've lived in North America.
Yes.
You've lived in Africa.
Yes.
You split your time. And that sounds actually really stupid to even say Africa. Like, it's a whole continent with many countries and multiple cultures. But you spent time in Uganda.
But I'd like to thank you for saying North America and then saying Africa, because that sets, you know, the two continents is equal.
Right.
Because a lot of people say, you know, Canada and Africa, you know? You know, which is completely,
Well, it's kind of ridiculous because if you step far enough away, it's Earth, right? And then we somehow conveniently will hone in on specific countries, but then leave someone else as a complete continent, which is kind of ridiculous. And, you know, my own experience here, like even though I was born and raised in Canada, when I go back to India, I'm Canadian. When I'm here, I'm the Indian guy. I almost have to wonder, like here maybe to many people you're black, maybe to a few folks you're the African guy. But when you're in Kampala, you're Ugandan. If you're traveling somewhere else in Africa, where would you even put yourself with some sort of national identity or cultural identity?
So in terms of national identity and cultural identity, like it's interesting for me because I grew up moving around a lot. So like I can just give you like a little like backstory into like my life, like in terms of countries. So I have Ugandan citizenship. And so by that, I am like tied to Uganda, like legally, right?
Okay.
Because I'm a Ugandan citizen. But I was born in Nigeria and have my birth certificate like being Nigerian. And I could apply for Nigerian citizenship and get it like this. I just choose not to, honestly, because of the amount of like profiling that I get simply being born in Nigeria. If I had Nigerian citizenship, it would like up the ante because unfortunately, because of these, you know, Nigerian princes who scam these like people, you know, I'm a rich Nigerian prince. Could you please send me your bank account details, etc. Because of that, Nigeria has an international reputation as being the home of like scammers and drug traffickers and human traffickers. And so like if you travel with a Nigerian passport, your chance of getting like profiled and stepped aside for additional processing or interrogation is like ridiculously high.
Right.
But I still have a lot of love and have a tie to Nigeria and my Nigerian heritage.
And sorry, where in Nigeria were you born?
Lagos.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. I was born in Lagos. And I've been wanting to go back because I left when I was 3, and I haven't been back since. But I left with a name, which I like 2 names actually, which I like very, very cling strongly to. My Yoruba name, because my parents had both Yoruba and Igbo friends mainly, because those are the 2 dominant groups in Lagos. And so my Yoruba, like aunties and uncles, like my mom's and dad's friends, gave me the name Olatokunbo, which means wealth and happiness from a foreign land, which is very apt to like my life, because like it's like, you know, like sort of like putting me in the perpetual box of being a foreigner, you know?
Right.
And then my Igbo aunties and uncles gave me the name Mba, which means one who is valid, which is another interesting name. Mm-hmm. And so when I was 3, so my dad worked for the UNDP, and so because of the nature of his work, we moved around a lot. Every 3 or 4 years, they assigned me to different countries. So 0 to 3 was in Nigeria, 3 to 6 was in Khartoum, Sudan, 6 to 9 was in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Okay, so that is the thing that caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of casually dropped in Dhaka. How did you end up there?
My dad's work. Okay. Yeah. Because the way my dad's position was, they were worried from what my mom told me, they were worried about like UN officials ending up in some government member's pocket if they'd lived in a country for too long and they were too comfortable, right? Because like they'd had a lot of corruption scandals, right, and they'd had a lot of people who were like, you know, like paid off, etc. So they were like, all right, so one way we'll battle this corruption is every 3 or 4 years we'll move these people to a different country so they don't get too comfortable, so they don't end up in anyone's pocket.
Okay.
Yeah, and you weren't allowed to work in your home country either, because there you know people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, it almost sounds like you're moving around in countries with a propensity for corruption in the first place, right?
Well,
yeah,
definitely,
ways,
because also it's the United Nations Development Program, right?
Yeah,
and so like they're working on like, you know, like clean water and you know, like women's education and gender-based violence and getting people like, you know, like to make more than $1 a day, like all these social development issues that happen in corrupt countries, you know,
right.
And it's because of the corruption that they're happening, you know, but they're still trying their best to.
And sorry, how old were you when you were in Dhaka?
I was 6, and then we left when I was 9.
And do you remember that time?
Yeah. No, I remember Dhaka. Yeah, Dhaka was a blast.
Yeah,
like I loved it because so like Dhaka has a huge cricketing culture, right?
Right.
And because of that, and because we were one of the only black families in Bangladesh at the time, because there were not a lot of like.
I can't imagine. It would have been, right? Like
they're not, because we were there from 1998 2001. There were not a lot of black people in Bangladesh at that time. And so everybody just assumed that because we were black and in Bangladesh, we were related to Brian Lara, the famous West Indian cricket player, because that was their, you know, like reference in terms of blackness. And so whenever we'd be like walking down the street as a family, they'd assume my dad was Brian Lara and that we were Brian Lara's kids. And so we got preferential treatment everywhere.
Wow.
Because they were like, oh, Brian Lara, oh, Brian Lara's kids. Like, oh, please. Like we got like pushed up to like, you know, like for first class dining everywhere. We got like reserved tables.
Wow, this is like the one instance in history of black privilege.
Exactly. It was amazing.
Wow.
Like my brother was on a train and he got bumped up to first class. Like I got free stuff all the time because I was Brian Lara's son, you know? It was
So, okay. So I'm actually really curious to deconstruct this a little bit. Do you think that had there been no cricketing culture, or had Brian Lara not been a factor in all of this, do you think your experience would have been different?
Oh, definitely, because like there is also at the same time a large amount of anti-blackness that is inherent in Desi culture, you know, like Fair and Lovely, you know, like all these whitening creams, like there was all this Brian Lara thing, which is a funny anecdote, but at the same time there was like people trying to like rip away my skin to see if, you know, the blackness comes off, you know, trying to see if like, oh, it was just dirt that was caked in there, you know, or people like grabbing my hair because they'd never seen or felt the hair of that texture before. People were literally ripping hairs out of my head, you know?
Which is crazy because you can find people throughout the subcontinent that are even darker than you are, right?
Yep. But yeah, like no, there's like, and there's like a lot of like, like monkey chants and bananas being thrown like at me, like, so like I'm not saying that Dhaka was a, like utopian or like post-racial society. No, Dhaka was a very racist place.
I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Brian Lara was just a funny little, like, one of the perks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, sorry, we've got Nigeria, Sudan,
Yes.
Bangladesh.
Yes.
Now where next?
After Bangladesh, we moved to Cambodia.
Okay.
Yes.
You are international man.
It's all my dad. It's not me. Because like I was a kid. I was just going along with the flow, Because like my dad's like, we're moving here. I was like, okay. Like I don't have a choice. I don't pay rent.
Yeah.
So we move, and it was all that I knew. And like because of like the systems that we were in, we were going to like a lot of international schools where a lot of people were in and out because a lot of the kids were like either kids of some like development worker or like some, like international, multinational bank or something where like they were moving around a lot too. And so there was that culture in the schools of like, you're in for a couple of years, you're out. And so like, it wasn't like a thing really.
And do you find if you're around all other people who are transient, constantly moving around, how did you find building relationships with people? Like, was it easy to build them also knowing that this is temporary?
I found it became harder as I grew up because when I was younger, like 0 to 6 was easier to build the transient relationships. And then when I hit like first grade, second grade, third grade, like I didn't want to leave at the end of third grade to move to Cambodia. And I remember like being like, I'm really going to miss my friends. Like, can't we stay? And my parents being like, nah, like, sorry, we have to go. And I was like, okay. And then when we left Cambodia, I remember being very, very, very torn up about that because I was in Cambodia from 9 to 13, which are very formative years.
Right.
And like I left at the end of 7th grade and I didn't want to leave it all out. Like I really wanted to stick around and like be with my friends. And so it was a lot harder on my older siblings who were older during all these moves rather than me, who I feel like my youth shielded me from it a little bit. But I mean, thanks to the advent of like Facebook and all these like wonderful like social media things, now I've been able to like reconnect with a lot of like my old friends and like my best friend from the 5th grade who I met, who's like African American, originally from Mali. I met him in Cambodia, and then we reconnected in Washington D.C. 4 years ago, and now we're like super tight again, and like we hang out like every single time I'm in the city because my brother lives there. And so like it's been beautiful the way social media has been able to like reconnect me with a lot of my childhood friends.
Right. Okay, so Cambodia, and then
Thailand for a couple of months. And the reason we're in Thailand for a couple months versus years was we got moved. So in Cambodia is where my dad fell sick. My dad fell sick from this like mysterious illness, which later on they figured out was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so he was away from us for a year. He got like rushed out of he got like airlifted out of Cambodia to Singapore because they have better hospitals there.
Right.
And so my mom went with him because she wanted to like make sure everything was all right. And so then I moved in with like, I mean, this is one of the powers of community. And one of the reasons that I'm like indebted to people, because I moved in with my best friend's parents who like took me in for a year and like became my parents. And they were like to my mom, because they were friends with my mom. And so they were like, no worries, we'll take care of Mugabi. Like, we'll look after him. Like, you don't have to worry about him. Like, we got him, you know? And so I moved in with them for a year while my mom was away in Singapore with my dad at the hospital. And then after that year was over, my dad started getting a little better. And so then the UN moved him to Thailand, where they said he can finish off his recovery and then he can start working there. Unfortunately, he ended up passing while he was there. And so then my family moved back home to Uganda. And it was like home, but not really home because I never lived there before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then at some point you end up in Toronto.
Yes. So I was in Uganda for 5 years, from 13 to 18, which was a huge mixed bag because it's like, I look like these people, you know? I don't talk like these people because I've never, you know, like lived here, you know, I don't have the accent and I don't speak the language either. because my parents were wrongly advised by the schools to only speak English at home and not speak any of our like native languages, which they regret. And so it was like a lot of like, why don't you like speak the language? Like, do you think you're too good for us? All this stuff. Just because, you know, like you like have lived in other countries doesn't mean you're better than us. And I'm like, I don't think I'm better than you. Like, you know, like I wish I knew the language. I just don't, you know? And very, 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 very interesting time in my life because I was going to school with a bunch of like ridiculously rich, ridiculously privileged kids. Because I was going to like, you know, like international school, but this time the UN wasn't paying for it. And so my mom had to take out a ridiculous amount of debt to like put us through the best schools because my mom's like education is how you make it out, you know?
Right.
And so going to school, these kids who like would like be like, oh yeah, I just got back from Italy and I just got this like these like $200 pair of shoes, check them out. And I'm like, yo, like after school I'm gonna go work at my mom's restaurant for like 8 hours, you know, and babysit my little sister and then do my homework by candlelight and then go to sleep, you know. So very different circumstances, but I made it out.
Here you are.
We all made it out. My whole family made it out, so props to us. And when I was 18, I ended up getting a scholarship, a full ride to go to Kansas in the States. So then I went over to the U.S., did my bachelor's in Kansas, graduated, and then got a fellowship to go to Michigan. Went up to Michigan for 6 months, and that's when the two strokes happened when I was 22.
Okay.
And so then I moved in to my sister's. I have a sister who was living and working in Washington, D.C. at the time. And so she took me in, and we were like just basically trying to figure out what's going on and trying to help me recover for like 1.5 years. And then when I was able to like function semi-independently, my brother, who was up in North York in Toronto, he was like, yo, I've seen, you know, you've been down with the sister for a while and, you know, y'all have been having a good time and I want some family time too. Like, he's like, come up and live with me. I know you've been working on a book and like he's a rapper, singer, songwriter. And he was like, I need and want another like creative like source around me to like help inspire me and get me out of my rut, because he was going through a little writing rut at the time. And he was like, and like, you know, honestly, like it would just be nice to have someone around the house.
Right.
And I was like, and he was like, you don't have to worry about rent, just, you know, like couch is yours, like there's food in the fridge, like just
come
write.
through.
Just come through and write. He's like, just pop a squat for a couple months. And I was like, all right. So I took him up on that.
And your sister and brother, they're older, younger? Well, you have an older brother, but your sister's she older as well?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm the fourth out of 5 children.
Okay.
Yes. So the oldest is a sister who is currently, how old is she now? 35. And she's currently based in Nairobi, Kenya. She's working there.
Okay.
Oldest brother is 33. He's based out of Washington, D.C. He's working there. Then I have the older brother in Toronto who's 31. Myself is 27. And then my little sister is 21.
Okay.
And she's in university.
Wow. Yeah. So 8 countries, if I'm counting right, in total.
I think so. I don't know. Nigeria, Sudan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Thailand, Uganda, the States, and Canada. Yeah, that's 8. Yeah.
That is a very global perspective during like most of your formative life. When you think back about all the places you've lived and all the people that have been in and out of your life, some are back in, like what have you noticed about people, like in general? Like if you were to just say people are like this is what makes us similar or different, what would you say about that?
I would say, honestly, like the similarities that I've noticed about people from the different cultures and different regions that I lived in is that people are curious. People are very curious because, like, I have very often been the person who is not from wherever I'm living.
Okay.
You know, like in Uganda, I am from Uganda, but people can tell by the way I like talk and dress and look that like I have definitely like spent like a large majority of my life outside of Uganda, right? And so they're like, oh yeah, you're Ugandan, but you're not really, you know?
Right.
And so like by not being from wherever I am, I get a lot of people being like, oh, so like, you know, and I strike up a lot of conversations with people who, and especially people who are like, native to a region, whenever I ask them back the same questions that they ask me, they go, "Oh no, like I'm from nowhere interesting. I'm just from here, you know." And like I'm always like, but here is super interesting because I'm here, you know. Like I went out of my way to come to like, you know, like Lawrence, Kansas, population of 100,000, where a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm just from Lawrence, and it's like, well, Lawrence is an amazing town. Like Lawrence is super interesting. Like
Shout out to Lawrence.
Yeah. Like Lawrence is the first small town that I ever lived in. Like I grew up in these megapolises, you know, like people think Toronto's a big city. Try coming to Dhaka, you know, try coming to Lagos, you know, like I'm talking like 10, 20 million people in a city, you know? And so like when I moved to Lawrence, that was my first ever experience living in anywhere that had less than 2 million people. And it was like, phew, you know, this is a huge culture shift. This is like massively interesting. It's a huge dynamic shift. And I feel like if people don't really take the time to like be like, oh, like what is in my backyard is interesting because it's what you're used to, because it's, you know, like what you see every single day. But if you saw your own backyard from the perspective of a foreigner in the same way that you do when you travel and you're like, wow, this is super interesting. But the people who are from there like are like,
it's so true, because I find, especially when I go to India, my wife's family's in Mumbai, a lot of my family's like around Delhi. When I go, I find, because there'd been so many years between me, I was 9 when I went, and then I didn't go again until I was 32. And once I got there, everything was interesting to me. Everything was fascinating. And, you know, I'm, you know, also, you know, I dabble in photography and videography and all this stuff, constantly sampling sounds. And everything was interesting. The sound of a train was interesting. That dog walking down the alley was interesting. Everything is like visually so, not necessarily beautiful in the classic sense of beauty, right? But it was very different than what I was used to seeing. And I just found it fascinating. So I'm taking pictures about all this stuff. And people are like, what are you taking pictures of? That's just like a box, or it's a dog or whatever. It's just like, it was nothing to them. And I think we do that with ourselves, even internally too, right? Like, I'm not that interesting. Well, what does that really mean? Like, let's unpack that a little bit. People go on these crazy long trips to try and discover themselves. And I think that journey just becomes the backdrop for the inner journey, that narrative, right? And you end up discovering yourself. You could have just sat there all day and figured out the same thing. I don't know why we do that to ourselves. Like, why don't we value ourselves enough to say, no, I am interesting. There is something worthwhile here.
I don't know, because like I would never call myself interesting. Like you
oh man, after all that, you learn nothing.
Like I'm guilty of it too, you know. Like you called me interesting, and like when you call me the most interesting man in the world, or you call me interesting, like my internal response is to shrink. And I
it's
feel
one
like,
of the few times I've seen a black man black.
I feel like this person's complimenting me, because I mean that's partially a cultural thing from my perspective though, because like it was hugely ingrained in me by my mother and my father, because it's a part of both of their cultures to be modest and be humble and not like not feel yourself at all, you know? And like if you like move around like confident and like, oh yeah, I did this, I did that, look at me, you're viewed as like, oh, like look at that person, that's a negative trait that they have.
But it's funny that interesting and modest are totally unrelated.
Yeah, you're
right.
right.
Like interesting doesn't mean egocentric or arrogant, right? I mean, saying I'm interesting, that's a different story, right? But I think we do that to ourselves. Like we're 20 minutes into this, and it's you've got no case, man, to say that you're not interesting, right? Like you literally have no case. You've lived all over the world. Your experience is that of a human being, and you're black.
Yes.
And in much of the world, at least at the time that you went, you were probably the only black person around outside of your family, right?
Few,
like, you know, one of few. And here you are in Toronto, and you're kind of floating between Uganda and Toronto. And in today's age, as a black man with a beard,
6 foot.
all those different things. Like, is your life today and how you see yourself in the world today different than you would have expected 10 years ago? Like, do you see the life of a person who is Black in today's world, in some surprising way? Like, should we be further along than we are? Are you unsurprised by this?
We should be massively further along than we are right now. Like when was it? Like Friday. Just this past Friday. I was at the pharmacy picking up my medication, and I'm standing there, talking to it was a Desi lady behind the counter. I'm talking to her, and this Filipino lady runs in breathless and is like, oh my god, I forgot my bag, and everyone's like looking around, like being like, where's the bag? And the bag was like tucked in the corner, like right next to me, and I was like, oh, it's right there. And so she runs and grabs the bag. She's like, oh my god, like I'm so thankful that like the bag was here. And then there's this like old white lady sitting down who looks over at me and like gives me side eye and says, you're lucky no one stole anything. And I'm like, really? Like, I was the only Black person in that whole pharmacy, Like, and you really had to point me out and say, you're lucky no one stole anything.
Well, I saw that tweet, and I think you said the pharmacist or whoever was behind the counter, she was Daisy.
Yes, she was Daisy.
And then you got a Filipino woman who's here looking for the bag. And that pecking order of racial hierarchy somehow solidified itself, even in this old white woman's mind, in an instant.
Exactly.
How does that happen?
Like, it's ridiculous, and like it really, really hurts me because like I have had a lot of encounters with racism and like race and like racialized, based like assaults and stuff throughout my life. And it's always been difficult for me to wrap my mind around why somebody would hate or be prejudiced towards someone off of something that is beyond their control. Because like whenever it's something within somebody's locus of control, that I understand, like if you're hating on me because you don't like the sneakers I wear, I'm like, all right, like you just don't like my sneakers.
Sure.
Yeah. Like, I'm not talking about like hatred in terms of like a massive, but like in terms of like looking at me some type of way because I'm wearing some sneakers, like, all right, like I chose to wear these sneakers. You don't like this brand. That's all right. But when it's something that you're literally born with, like something completely beyond your control, whether that be like sexuality or gender identity or gender or race, like that to me makes no sense. Like I've, had, been arrested a couple times for simply walking down the street while Black. I've had guns pulled to my head, and like it makes no sense, but it makes me move through the world a certain type of way, and it makes me move through the world very, very cautiously and very, very hesitantly because like I could die very, very easily.
Mm-hmm. You know what is interesting? For whatever reason, Canadians in general, we seem to operate on this high horse, at least relative to the neighbors to the south. And I find that people here don't think that racism exists to the extent that it actually does. And to a large extent, I can't fault most people that think that, because in their lived experience, it might not be the case, right? Certainly, if you're white in this country, you're probably not going to deal with it, unless maybe you're in some very, very deeply ethnic neighborhood or something. And even then, it's not really necessarily racism per se. If you happen to be from certain ethnic or racial groups, you might face it from time to time. If you're Aboriginal in this country, you're not even in the conversation, which is just sad. Like, the Aboriginal people have been pushed so to the fringe of this that, we all showed up here later on, right? Some by choice, some not by choice, whatever. But they were here already, and yet no one even includes them in it. But I find that there's this idea that, in particular, the level of anti-Black racism isn't as bad as it is in the U.S. Now, I can't say statistically whether that's true or not, but like having enough Black friends and being in proximity of some of their experiences, definitely not living any of those experiences. I've lived my own set of experiences as a brown man in this country, but I wouldn't put those anywhere near what I'm seeing still day to day with friends. Do you think that we're just lying to ourselves when we say, no, we're past that here? Or is it that we don't want to confront the fact that we still got real issues?
I think it's the latter. Yeah. I think, what's it called? Because like when I talk with my white Canadian friends about like, like Canadian racism and my experiences and stuff, a lot of them are aghast, and they're aghast in the way like they had never heard this from anyone before in their life, and they're aghast in the way that they like are completely taken aback. And to me, that shows that, because I know that they do have other black friends, and so that shows that their black friends are not telling them what they go through, because I know that their black friends are going through the same stuff as I'm going through. And so it's a question of, do their black friends not feel comfortable enough around them to, like speak openly and honestly around them? Or is it that they haven't done the best job of like creating that space where like, like it's open and honest, and you should feel comfortable enough to like share? Because like when I'm in spaces that are more like predominantly people of color or predominantly black people, like there is that more openness, rather than like when like it's a white dominant space,
Right.
And so like I honestly think, yeah, that like a lot of Canadians don't want to confront or don't want to like deal with the fact that, like racism exists and it's out there and like it's a thing, and like it's something that like we can actively dismantle and unpack, but it's something that affects all of us, and it's something that like white people leverage a lot of privilege from, in the same way that I leverage a lot of privilege from being a man, and like sexism exists and patriarchy exists, and like I'm not gonna deny that, but like I feel like it's a defensive topic, because a lot of white people feel like if I'm saying racism exists and you like leverage privilege from it, that I'm calling them a racist. And they're like, no, but I'm not racist,
Right, yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like this is not about you. Like stop centering yourself, stop making it about you. Like get yourself out of the picture, Like we're talking about a bigger issue here.
I think part of it from, like, I end up having these type of conversations a lot, and I'm also fully willing to call out the fact that the racism is not just from white people towards everyone else. Everybody's racist to some extent. I mean, you kind of touched on it. There's racism in the Desi community, in the South Asian community. There's racism everywhere. And in many cases, a lot of that racism is anti-black racism within the South Asian community, within the East Asian community. For a lot of people, it's uncomfortable to say that one group of people who might not be top of the food chain is also perpetuating some of the same things. But let's just call a spade a spade. It's everywhere. But I find
even within the black community, like like purely off of blackness itself, like what's it called? There's the whole like light skin versus dark skin, and that whole debacle, and like it's everywhere. Yeah,
yeah, and I find when this conversation comes up with people who are of different backgrounds. So if I had this conversation with someone who is Chinese or Cambodian or whatever, there's some level of culpability that they don't necessarily personally feel for it, because they're also the victims of some degree of racism and prejudice. But when you talk to somebody who is white, there's not really much of an out to say that they are the victim of something. And I think that when we raise these issues, sometimes people take it, like you're saying, personally, and it plays into this personal guilt, when that's really not the point. The point is that we recognize this is a problem that we all need to do something about, because we're all actually in this. If one person is suffering, then we're all suffering. And the only times where I've seen it really, really clearly hit home is when there's this one woman I met. She's white. Her son is black. And there's many nights where she's been freaked out. She doesn't know if he's going to make it home. Good kid, goes to school, does normal everyday kid stuff. I think he's 20, 21, something like that. And I think he had been pulled over by the cops once. He's been carded, all of this sort of thing. And for her, never having lived that life, but now seeing it with her son, that she loves as much as any mother loves her son, you see that proximate conflict with her, right? But it shouldn't have to be that close to home for people to get it. And so I find when I have these conversations with people, I'm like, Okay, let's pretend it's maybe not as bad as the worst stories that you're hearing, but it's still bad enough, right? It's still not the type of experience you want to have your neighbor or your friend go through on a daily basis. So all of this sort of in everyday life, and then what was it, last week or the week before, suddenly we find that our prime minister is rocking blackface or brownface. I mean, that wasn't brownface. Let's be real here. He's rocking blackface on at least 2 or 3 occasions. It's a terrible costume. There's no need for blackface. And this is not a prime minister that gets busted for doing this in the 60s. When he was doing it in the 40s. This is a prime minister in 2019 being busted for something that happened in 2001, when I would hope that pretty much anywhere in the world, there's a level of awareness about this, that's just not cool, right? And I mean, I wonder, like, as a person living here who is Black, like, when you saw that, like, what did you feel about that?
Like, I wasn't surprised, you know? Like, yeah, like as sad as it may be, like I saw it and I was like, oh, you know, but like I wasn't surprised because like I've seen white people doing, you know, blackface and brownface and all sorts of caricatures like since I was a child, you know? And so like that's something that like doesn't surprise me. And with Trudeau, like him personally, like it didn't really surprise me because look at him, look at the way like I mean, he's a politician, you know, like, like he's a politician who grew up in a political family, and really there should have been like somebody like out there like cleaning up his like past, you know, and like this shouldn't have come out now. I was more surprised at the timing that it came out than the fact that it existed. Because, like, if he had this level of dirt on him, it should have come out of the first election, you know?
Yeah.
And so the fact that it came out now was a surprise. But the fact that he did it, that doesn't surprise me because these are the same kids who I went to college with. Like, I know kids who did blackface. Like, they're not friends of mine, you know? But, like, I'd see them in the dorms in blackface and I'd be like, what are you doing? And they'd be like, and then they'd run to the bathroom and get all awkward. And I went to college 2010, 2014, you know? And so, like, if it's still going on till this day, and these are going to be the same people who are going to be running for office, these random kids who I bumped into in the dorms, you know, then, like, why would it be surprising that it happened in 2001?
Why do you think people do blackface?
I don't know. Because, like I had this conversation with my brother, and, like, it's like, I have dressed up as white characters for Halloween. Like, I went as Clark Kent for Halloween.
Yeah.
Did I paint my face white? No, because like why would that thought would never even cross my mind of
such
like
a stretch.
You know, like in order to be Clark Kent, then I have to like, you know, get my button up, put my Superman shirt underneath it, get my glasses, you know, like my reporter hat. Like Clark Kent is not a costume is not a color, you know, and like I've never seen it that way, and so I honestly have a lot of trouble wrapping my mind around why somebody would actually like paint their skin a different color in order to embody a costume.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. Like, you would have to go through a lot of trouble. Let's be real. It's North America. You go to Halloween. I mean, before Black Panther, there's really no kind of common ethnic or Black character that you would necessarily be. Like, if you were a fireman, you are a fireman. If you're a nurse, you're a nurse. If you're Superman, you're Superman. And if you're a Black kid or you're a brown kid and you're Superman, then you're just Black Superman.
Exactly.
Like that. It's just that.
I went as Black Robin in the second grade. Like, and everyone knew I was Robin. It wasn't like any, you know, like I didn't have to go white to be Robin.
The level of effort it takes to do that. Like, okay, I've seen, you know, people dress up as like a space alien or Shrek or Hulk or whatnot, and they go green. Yeah. Okay, I kind of get that, but like...
But that's a color that doesn't exist on the human spectrum, you know? That's like... Yeah. Like, if you want to paint your face purple or like green, like, go for it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason... I've never seen anybody of color in my entire life being in this country, especially around Halloween or crazy parties or anything. I've never seen someone go and put on like white paint on their skin for the sake. I actually don't understand the underlying driver for that. You know, it's funny because the Trudeau thing happened, and I think I was a little bit. I can't say I was shocked, a little disappointed, not so much even upset. Surprised definitely that it took this long for that dirt to come out, and that the entire Canadian media and any of his enemies, which there's many of, didn't find this dirt on him. But I thought to myself, I'm like, I have enough other, I mean, personally, you know, now we're getting a little bit politically here. I have enough other issues on purely political decisions that this government's made, he's lost moral high ground, right? He's completely lost moral high ground in, being able to call out someone for homophobia or racism or anything else, right? And there's a lot of people who are very staunch supporters of Trudeau in particular, and the Liberal Party in general, because whether it was Idi Amin in Uganda, which forced out a whole bunch of South Asians into the UK and into Canada, all the waves of migration that happened in the 60s. Like this man's father was one of the architects of multiculturalism, and by many respects, like a great leader in the modern context. So I see him. I see Justin Trudeau as a man who's been raised in extreme privilege, no question, right?
Yeah.
Yet he's coming from a family and a lineage that I would probably hope to be a little bit more understanding, right? And probably a little bit more well acquainted with the impact that such a decision would have. And he wasn't a kid, right?
No,
I mean, maybe the first instance he was like 17. He's 29, right? Like if you're more than like 13, 14, and you think this is a good idea, in the last 20 years, you need new friends, you need new people around you, because that shit's just whack.
Yeah,
right?
It's ridiculous.
But now he's lost moral high ground, but it's also kind of twisted the conversation around racism as if it's our prime minister acted in a racist way. So you've got, on one side, you got people saying he's not racist. Look at everything he's done for immigrant communities and refugees and whatnot. And that may well be, right? So, he made a mistake and let's move on from it. And there's I've seen that same sentiment coming from brown people, black people, Asian people, white people. It doesn't matter, right? There's a lot of people that support him and say that is not who he is. And yet we've got persistent racism against Jagmeet Singh, throughout his campaign. You have racism against all sorts of people who are campaigning in different ridings across the country. And then you just have these persistent, structurally racist systems as well. So it's like taking one symptom and it's made it like the main focus. And now if Trudeau apologizes or at some point we find a path forward, we've kind of moved on as a country. Well, fuck no.
No,
we're no better off today than we were 2 weeks ago as a result of this.
No, not at all.
It's I know it's just it's a twisted time. I'm curious, with all of the experiences you've had, at what point did you start to articulate this in a creative way? Like, you've been a sponge all your life, but have you always been writing? Have you always been creating?
So I've been writing since I was very, very young, but I've been writing for myself. Yeah, I hadn't been publicly releasing or putting my work out there. I started writing, pretty much as soon as I could read. Because I remember, when I was a kid, I come from a family of big readers. And so my 3 older siblings were always just, curled up reading on the couch. And I'd run up to them and be like, yo, let's go play a game outside. And they'd be like, no, we're busy reading. And at the time, I didn't know how to read. And so, I remember, running over to my mom and being like, hey, could you teach me how to read? Because, I thought playing was the greatest thing ever,
Sure.
I just loved running outside, kicking a football, hopping on my bike, etc. And so I was like, what is reading that it could be more fun than playing a game, outside with my siblings? And I was like, this reading thing must be amazing. And so my mom taught me how to read eventually, over the course of a couple months. And then, once I discovered how to, read on my own, I was just like, phew, this is amazing. Because, all these worlds and, that I can dive into, I can, be, a pirate on the high seas. I could, be, some intrepid explorer. And that's one thing that I credit my parents to doing, is they always made sure that we had a lot of literature and media around us that represented ourselves. And so I never felt like I couldn't be something, because we were growing up on Byenka and Achebe and all these amazing writers who put blackness forefront and center to their narratives, right? And so I know a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of my friends who grew up in predominantly white societies, they grew up, reading literature that didn't represent them, and that's a struggle that I can't relate to, which is like a great thing that I can't relate to, because it's like, it helped me, but at the same time it's like it sucks that so many people grow up in societies where they don't feel represented through their media and through like their literature. And so that's why it's so great that we have things like Black Panther and Luke Cage and Shang-Chi coming out, like, so that we can have that great representation on a mainstream level. Because if it wasn't for my parents like curating like our personal libraries, like if we were just going out and like consuming what was out there, we wouldn't have that. But yeah, no, I mean, I've always been writing these like little short stories, and like I used to like illustrate them and stuff, and I'd always just been writing like occasional poetry and just like just a lot of like stories since I was a kid.
Right.
I just didn't start putting it out there until relatively recently.
It's interesting you mentioned Black Panther, because there's a friend of mine who I was talking with. I think when it came out, it was funny because he is from Nigeria, right? And I think for a lot of the Black population in North America knows obviously the roots are in Africa, but has been here for so many generations that there's those ties are very much theoretical, right? Like it's not necessarily tangible.
No.
And I remember him telling me he'd gone to see Black Panther. He found it entertaining, but he found it kind of almost silly, like kind of it was a caricature, right? The accents and everything, right? And this country that's Wakanda, which is supposedly close to where modern day Rwanda is, and it's sort of borrowing all these elements from different African cultures and creating this thing. And I think when he had gone to see the film, he saw a bunch of young Black youth that were coming to watch the film, and they're full on cosplay, right? Like they're dressed up and everything, they're going for it. And he thought the whole thing was kind of silly. And I remember I was listening to him and I'm thinking something feels off here, right? Like, I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But then I kind of put myself in the shoes of if I had never, ever seen myself as a superhero, right? Which I don't, right? But if I'd never, ever seen myself represented in that way, and this thing is now, one of the biggest movies on the planet, in the biggest, comic book cinematic universe that's ever been created, right? And it's badass. I'm gonna get all over that. So I kind of said to him,
like massive stars attached to it.
Oh, of course, yeah. And so I remember saying to him, I'm like, well, I mean, like white people go, cosplay all the time. They like nerd out over the stuff. Like, if you're a Black person that wants to nerd out and cosplay, and now there's finally a character that you don't have to be, I'm the Black version of this.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you do that, right? Like it's. I feel like something clicked at that point for him. Like it was a different way of looking at it, because as much as Black Panther may well be a caricature of many African cultures kind of blended into one, and maybe it becomes the first dialogue for some people to kind of discover, okay, where are some of these elements coming from?
Exactly.
I read a little bit about the artist that was behind the set design and art direction there, and how she spent so much time studying these different African cultures and bringing different handicrafts and ways of architecture. And there's so much nuance within African culture as a whole, because there's so many different countries, so many different tribes, so many different languages. And I think that's what's lost here. Like people just stand back and see it's a continent full of Black people.
Yes,
Well, that's a pretty ignorant thing to kind of think, especially today. But in terms of just reading and writing, I recently actually met the CEO of LeVar Burton's company.
Oh, okay, that's amazing.
Sangeeta Patel. So it was interesting because I got to see LeVar Burton at South by Southwest last year. Then I met her. I was a kid in a candy store because I grew up watching Reading Rainbow.
Okay, nice.
And then I met Sangeeta right after his keynote. We got to talking. She's come on the podcast. We had a phenomenal conversation. I learned a lot from her. But her talking about LeVar and then me completely either by chance or not bumping into LeVar Burton at the airport in Austin and just having a quick chat with him. It was quite an interesting experience because he talked about growing up in a single parent home with his mother, who was all about reading. Most of his memories were of him seeing his mother reading. She prioritized that. And because he said, like, your kids emulate what they see, right? Not what you tell them, it's what you see. So if you want your kids reading, you got to read in front of your kids. And to which I felt instantly guilty because I got a couple of young kids, so we've been doing a better job of not just reading with them and to them, but reading in front of them.
Yes.
But he talked about the experience he had of like kind of like what you're saying, like unlocking these worlds. That because you see books on a shelf.
Yeah.
But what you don't realize is it's a portal.
Yes.
Right? It's a portal into some other dimension, some other world, some other experience that's not yet your own. But you internalize that, you make it your own, and something new and organic kind of comes of that. So it's just it's really interesting that I think reading, because I think we're innately creative. Not everyone can express it, right? Not everyone can write, rap, draw, paint, whatever it might be. But I do think that if given enough of a structure in a canvas, and let's call that structure the words on a page, our imaginations will fill in gaps and go directions that, you and I read the same book at the same time, maybe even have every other life experience that's similar. We're still going to have a very different image in our head.
Definitely.
That's our own image that will never exist for anyone else. And that's beautiful.
No, it's amazing. Like Stevie Wonder, I listened to this podcast by Ali Shahid Muhammad from A Tribe Called Quest.
Okay.
And Franny Kelly, who's a music journalist, and they interview a whole bunch of different people related to the music industry. And Ali Shahid Muhammad began like the first episode with a quote by Stevie Wonder, where he said Stevie Wonder said that like when people ask him about his creative process, he said like, "Oh, I'm not the one like creating, like I'm not the one like in charge." He was like, I'm a vessel. He's like, call it what you want, call it God, call it deities, call it the universe, call it divine energy, call it what you want, but I tap into something and the music flows through me. And that was the first time that I'd heard it expressed like that, because that's the exact same thing when I write. Like, it's not coming from me, you know? Like,
it's a flow state.
Yeah. It's coming from something else. I just tap into that flow state and it comes out. And like all the musicians that I know, same thing, you know? Like all the artists that I know, same thing. Like it would be massively like egocentric to say that, like it's all coming from you and you are the source of like, your creative faculties. No, because like it's something else. It's something beyond.
It's I mean, like we're both poets and spoken word poets writing. Last year, for the first half of the year, for whatever reason, I don't know what was up. It was just a very inspired time for me.
That's dope.
I didn't try to write anything, but I must have written 40 or 50 pieces. Like there'd be days I was on the subway and I'm just firing out 2-3 short poems a day. At this point, I've compiled around 130 pages of my own poetry and prose. Wow, kind of slowly working through it to kind of eventually maybe publish. Let's see. But I look back at the stuff that I've written, and it's not me saying that it's all great, right? Because even that's very subjective.
Yeah, you need to edit and
Yeah, I know I'm brutally critical of my own work, and I'd say most of the stuff that I've created in the last 20 years sucks. Most of the stuff in the last few years I think is good. Whether anyone else thinks it is or not is kind of irrelevant. But I look at those words and I think, there is no way if I sat down today I could write that. I cannot write the thing that I wrote. Some thought, and I love, for me when I'm writing, I don't like to sit still in a room. Like that usually doesn't work for me.
Okay.
I think because I'm a very visual person, if I'm out in the world, if I'm on the subway, if I'm walking down the street, some random thing will happen. I'll hear a sound, I'll see a passing, a dog walking down the street, someone will be yelling at somebody else. And some visual cue or auditory cue will trigger a line or a word. And then if, I used to just write by hand, but now it's usually on my phone because that's what's around. It's like, I feel like I'm a zombie. Like my thumbs are just doing all the work and the words are flowing.
Yep.
And then I'll go back and I'll edit and whatnot. But that original idea is purely flow state. It's like I've been kind of hooked into some portal at that point. And so every great artist in almost every genre has said more or less the same thing that Stevie Wonder said, right? I've met, the most accomplished Indian classical musicians in the world and been fortunate to spend some time with them. They'll say the same thing. I've met, love him or hate him, at one point, just in passing, I met Brian McKnight when he was in Toronto. I was a big fan. I think he's still one of the best soul R&B vocalists ever. And I remember asking him, like, the directions he takes his freestyling and just the way he approaches it. Like, where does that come from? And he said more or less the same thing. It just happens. Like, he's got the tools. He spent the time.
Exactly.
And those two things together, it just kind of happens. And so I think it's amazing. And in some way, I feel like we're all tapping into the same source. We're expressing it through the vessel that we are,
Exactly.
right? Like, you're expressing it through the 8 countries and the experience that you're having. I'm expressing it through my own experience. But it shows us, like, the oneness between us too. And I find that continually beautiful too, on top of the fact that we just, like you were saying, we don't understand the brain really at all, even after decades of research.
No, it's a fascinating, like it's a miracle of sorts, that like we're able to tap into something and like express such like concise yet convoluted ideas through a wide array of different mediums. Because like it's always very interesting for me to look at artists inspired by other artists. So like to see like somebody who say listened to an album and created a painting out of it,
Right.
And like it's a complete different medium, but saying very, very similar things, and to see like what strands and what threads they pulled and what they highlighted, what they chose to like dim, and like just like the interpretations that different people take on pieces of work, which is why I love like the MCU and all these comic book movies, because I'm a huge comic book nerd. Like I've been reading since like I was a kid. And so like whenever people are like, oh, like we finally have Black Panther, I'm like, Black Panther's been around since the 60s. Like, like,
right. Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Like for like the comic book nerds, like we've already been cosplaying Black Panther since like, like the 63, like, and so like, it's interesting for me though, to see in the movies and seeing the TV shows, see how these like showrunners and these directors and these writers choose to interpret and take the character, because like I'm never expecting something straight out of the comic book. If I wanted that, I'd read the comic book, I'm just looking to see like what their vision is and how they choose to like interpret this character. And sometimes like I mean most of the time like they do an excellent job, sometimes but I mean that's part of the artistic process, right? It's never going to be everyone's cup of tea.
It's funny that you were just mentioning comic books, because I was just reading. I need to actually look it up real quick, because I was listening to Sam Harris's podcast the other day, and he had this woman on who was fascinating because she writes a lot about mind and space and motion. Barbara Tversky.
Okay.
She is a big fan of comic books, and part of the reason she was a big fan of comic books is because our cognitive processes, we use language as one vehicle, right? For thought, for expression, for communication. And as powerful as it is in many dimensions, it's actually very limited in other dimensions, right? Like it would be very hard to be driving down the road and to say out loud all of the things that you need to do while driving. Because there's so many different things happening, right? Like words are very limited. Like there's one stream of consciousness basically that can kind of flow out through words. If you were an NBA basketball player, going through every single micro decision you need to make when you're making a play and whatnot, based on who's where on the court and how you're feeling, all of those things, you couldn't express that through words.
Definitely.
And a lot of the way that we perceive the world, she was kind of sharing her research and the research of others is based on moving through the world, right? Like the way that we interpret spaces, right? If people are giving you directions on how to get from point A to point B, most of us will probably start pointing randomly in the air, right? We'll use our hands. And the moment that we have to sit on our hands or force ourselves not to use motion, we'll actually have a harder time explaining the directions. So she also talked about comic books and why they're really helpful, particularly for kids, because a lot of what is communicated in an experience is not verbal.
Yes.
So comic books are frames of a scene. So your mind has to fill in the gaps between the frames. But a lot of what's in a comic book isn't even necessarily written, right? There's the words the character's saying, but there's the punch that they're throwing. There's the direction that they're looking to something that's sort of off camera, if you will. And our minds start to fill in all of those things, right? So she's actually a big fan of kids reading comic books, like, good comic books for to be able to really kind of help build out some of those cognitive processes. And I think comic books, I realized I loved them as a kid, and then I kind of just stopped paying attention to them for a long time. And now I'm kind of curious to pick back up on them, just because there is so much more to our imaginations to fill in than you can just necessarily write down.
No, that's fascinating, honestly, because so I manage a bunch of different like cognitive and like neural processing issues as a result of my strokes, and that manifests in different ways. And like if like I'm having like a decent health day like today, then like I can normally like process the world in like more neurotypical way. But if I'm having a difficult day, like if I just had a seizure and my mind is all wonky, it's difficult for me to like process and take in information. And so sometimes I can't speak. And so like I have to like sign out like what I'm trying to say. But one of the things that I do when I'm having like a rough time, like cognitively, is I can't take in large blocks of texts because like it gets all muddled up and it confuses my mind, and I can't like digest a large block of text. And so one of the things that I do to like build my mind back up to be able to handle text is I read comics. And I've found that like when I can't take in like a book, like I can't read a book, I can read a comic book. And reading the comic book and like getting through a comic book enables me to be able to work my way up to be able to like read an email or like reply to like a text message, because like the comic is somehow easier for my brain to digest than a text message or an email.
So, I mean, it almost sounds, and maybe this is a crude way of putting it, feels like you're kind of relearning something that you can do like over and over.
Or like if I'm just looking for like a way to like just like distract my mind from the fact that like like I'm having a rough day, I'm in a lot of pain, my legs are paralyzed, I just need something to like get my mind off of it. I just read a comic because like that like reading is very therapeutic for me also. Like I lose myself in that world, and in that world I don't have to deal with the fact that my legs are paralyzed and I can't get out of bed. In that world I don't have to deal with the fact that I just had a 2-hour long seizure and like I'm in excruciating amount of pain. In that world I'm like flying amongst rooftops with Spider-Man. And like
Wow. Do you find when you're in that place, and that, like, I mean, what a good day looks like, and obviously what a bad day for you looks like, and when you're in that difficult day, can you see the good day?
When I'm in a difficult day, can I see the good day? It depends on how long the difficult days have lasted. Because if it's like a day or 2 or 3 long difficult day streak, then I can usually see the good day coming. But sometimes, it happens more rarely, but sometimes my difficult days run for like a number of weeks. And when it lasts that long, it's very, very hard for me to see it ever getting better, because like the pain just gets ridiculous. Like I'm getting next to no sleep, having like 2 to 4 seizures a day. It's like I go down to like bare survival mode where I'm just like, I need to make sure I eat something every day. I need to make sure that I take my medication. I need to make sure that I have to do everything to function, because like doing anything beyond functioning is just beyond my capacity right now, beyond anything that my mind could even like try to do. Like if I try to like do a little something extra, I just go into a seizure. So I just lie down. When it gets really, really bad, I just lie down and like listen to some music and just like hopefully wait for it to pass. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, but your brain at the same time, like your neuroplasticity must be through the roof, right? Like you're able to do so much. Like like I can only imagine what's happening in your brain at any given point in time.
It's amazing, honestly. Like I am like I used to hate my brain and I used to hate my body because I was like, oh, like it's thanks to my brain that I have all these like illnesses and all this like tribulations and trials. But then I was like, wait, no a second. Like whatever illness it is, like my brain is fighting against that. My brain is incredibly resilient, and I had to like reframe that and be like, no, my brain's got my back, my body's got my back. It's just whatever this illness is that's like throwing things for a loop. But like no, like in terms of neuroplasticity, like I mean, I'm left-handed, and that is like not what I was natural. I was naturally right-handed. But then the right side of my body got paralyzed, so I had to learn how to do things on my left hand. And so, like, neuroplasticity is definitely, like, youth massively helps that, because what I've heard is like, because I'm friends with stroke survivors, but like most of them are like 3 times my age. Because yeah, and like my stroke survivor friends who I know who are like elderly, they're like amazed by the things that I can do. But it's also because I'm young, and because these strokes happened to me when I was young, and the brain is just, it's a lot easier for the brain to bounce back and to learn how to like do new things and to like be more plastic the younger that you are.
There's one of my favorite books ever is by this quantum physicist named Amit Goswami. I think it's called A Conscious Universe. So the opening preface in the book is this fictional character kind of walking around at it's a brain conference, and he's talking to neuroscientists and neurologists and psychologists, and he's asking, what is consciousness? And then, the neuroscientist gives one, very mechanistic answer to it, synapses firing in the brain and electrical currents, and then the psychologist talks about the ego and the id and whatnot, and they don't really resolve in that conversation what exactly they think consciousness is. But he kind of finishes off with, I may be paraphrasing, but the statement is, if the brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be too simple to understand it. Right? Like we're measuring the tool with the tool itself, right?
No,
it's just, like even like the things that on a normal day that we do are so astoundingly complex. Like we've thrown billions of dollars at robots trying to mimic even the tiniest little bit of intelligence. Getting Boston Dynamics now has these robots that walk on 4 legs or on 2 legs and can do parkour and whatnot, but they're still very clumsy. Yeah, right. The things. What's really amazing actually is seeing your own children from like the moment they're born, and when they start doing little things. I think before I was a father, I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Your kid's doing something new. Like he's touching his nose or whatever. He's smiling, and that's cute. That's cool. But I think when you actually see those increments happening, and you realize the distance between those increments, like my kids, both of them, when they were born, for whatever reason, like they'd wake up in the morning, scratches all over their face. They were scratching themselves, like at night. With my daughter, we had to put little socks on her hands while she was asleep and stuff. And when we talked to the doctor about it, it's like, oh yeah, they don't actually know what these things are, right? Like, so we're kind of born with this fight or flight mechanism, right? Everything from an amoeba, right up to an elephant. We all want to survive, right? We perceive danger, and you're a baby who has been comfortably floating around in this like fluid, like in this dark chamber. And now here you are outside, and all of a sudden there's these weird appendages that are like wiggling and coming at you. And so the kid doesn't necessarily know. The kid doesn't know. It doesn't have that level of self-awareness. Doesn't know that these things with fingers are its own hands. And so is at the same time, wiggling and scratching itself, and at the same time trying to run away from it. So when you go from that to a kid actually looking at something at a distance and trying to pick it up and realizing it's too far for me to reach, so I'm going to try and move to get there, and then they fall or they kind of crawl, like every little thing along that path is such a huge leap, right? And, eventually they're talking and they're stringing together words and, having existential conversations or whatever it is. And you try to sum it all up and like, how the hell did this happen? Like we're miracles. We are. Full stop. Yeah, right.
Definitely.
Like, it's humbling.
No, massively. And like I am not a parent myself, and I don't remember the first time that I was making all these leaps. I saw it through my little sister, through just like babysitting her and watching her grow, but also like personally, like I've had to learn how to walk again 3 times, right? Like, I mean, the first time was when I was a baby, which is, like everyone goes through that. Second time after the first stroke, third time after strokes 2 and 3. And so like I've had this like visceral like humbling of like being reverted to like a baby like state of physically being unable to like move my legs in a walking like mechanism, and having to like relearn all these like neural pathways in order to get myself to stand up and walk, which is incredibly frustrating because like when you're a child, at the very least, like that's expected, like like you're not expected to come out the womb walking, and like you can't communicate, and so you can't like let like that frustration out, and you don't remember when you grow up like everything that you went through, right? And so it's just like, oh yeah, like I don't remember not being able to walk as a kid, like I remember like my first memory is like 3 or 4, and so like being able to like fully like function mentally but not fully function physically is incredibly frustrating. It was incredibly frustrating for me to go through, but like I feel like it's a good preparation for being elderly, and like slowly losing whatever faculties and capabilities I have, and also just like a good like like humbling experience for life in general. Just like nothing you have is permanent, like everything can be taken away, like including your body, including your mind at any time, and you just gotta make best what you can do with what you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Your book. I know you've heard this a million times, but the cover is awesome.
Thank you.
Like, I love the cover art. Dear Philomena, right?
So none of the credit for the cover like goes to me at all.
Okay.
The cover was designed by an amazing Saudi Arabian graphic designer called Mawada Amer. When she
leave it to you to find a graphic designer who's Saudi Arabian, right? Like, of course. All right.
She's one of my really good friends from when I was in Kansas. I met this amazing Saudi Arabian girl called Mala, and we became really, really good friends. She's actually getting married soon, so shout out Mala for her upcoming wedding. And Mala was like, me and Mala are still really tight. We talk every now and again. She's in Saudi Arabia working, and she told me when I was working my book, she was like, oh, my little sister's a graphic designer. Like, you should hit her up about your book cover. And her little sister hit me up, and she was like, hey, I'd love to design her book cover. I was like, sure thing. Like, let me, like, see what you're working with. At the time, I was like, like, I'm just being nice. But, like, you're 20 years old. You're in school studying graphic design. I'm not really sure if you, like, have what it takes to like design a book cover, but then she sent me her work, and I was like blown away, and I was like, sheesh, like gladly I'd love to have you on for as part of the team. And the book cover that we ended up going with was the one that I didn't want, actually.
Okay.
Because like humbleness, modesty, that's how I was raised.
You didn't want your face all over the book.
No, I don't want my face on the book at all, because I was like, that is like a massively like egotistical thing to do, and that makes me feel very, very uncomfortable to have my face on the cover of my book.
But I mean, to be fair, it's kind of split in two.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
and honestly, what like I like workshopped it with a bunch of friends and family. I sent out like the 3 book cover options, and I was like, blind test, which one do you like the best? And everyone was like, the one with your face on it, the one with your face. And I was like, crap, like, I guess I gotta go for this, because like it was the popular, like it was what everybody gravitated to, because everyone's like, this is a beautiful cover. Like if I saw that on a bookstore, I'd pick it up and be like, what's this about,
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I guess that's what the popular vote is. But no, that's all Mawada. Like, she did an amazing job with the details, like the letters that are going back and forth in my face. They have my handwriting on it, spelling out Philomena's address. Yeah.
Wow.
Like her attention to detail and the level of like intricacy that she puts into her work. Like, I just have to like big up her and like follow her on Instagram if you're interested in her stuff at Mawada, Mawaddah.
Yeah, I'll grab the link from you, because I'll throw it up on the website along with a link to your book. But so, I mean, the cover is already intriguing, to say the least. But tell me about the story of this book. Like, what is it about? Like, what is it that you want the world to know about this?
So the story of the book, I like to call it experimental epistolary speculative novel.
Okay.
Because that's hard for me to say, and it's like a fun challenge, but also because the book is told through a series of conversations, and so it's not told in a conventional storytelling format. The story of the book starts when I was in my mother's womb. The doctors do an ultrasound and tell her, congratulations, you're expecting a baby girl. So she's very excited, very happy, because she'd wanted 2 girls and 2 boys. And at this point, she'd had 1 girl, and she very, very much wanted a a girl who was more like high femme and hyper feminine than my oldest sister. Because my oldest sister, she is now become a different person, but in childhood she was very, very much a like tomboy, like roughshod gallivanting with my brothers, like playing football. So then she was expecting me, and so she was like, all right, so she picked the name Philomena for that baby girl. Because she's Catholic, and she's very drawn to the story of Saint Philomena. So she gives birth. The doctors say, congratulations, it's a boy. My mom's like, what happened? Doctors are like, sorry, guess we made a mistake reading the ultrasound. It happens sometimes. My mom's like, no, you didn't. You told me I was going to have a girl, so I'm having a girl. And so for the first couple months of my life, she was like a cute little baby Philomena. And then eventually, like my birth certificate literally reads my name as baby Byenka, because she was like, I wasn't expecting a boy. Just write down baby. We'll figure it out later.
Right.
But then she had my little sister, so then she was like, okay, I got my second girl, so like you can just be whatever you want to be. And I was like, all right, sounds good to me. But she's told me this story my whole life of Philomena is who you're supposed to be. And so I took this story that she told me of Philomena and of the, like, you know, the girl I was supposed to be. And I decided to create a series of conversations between myself and Philomena. And I chose to focus on 1 year of my life for those conversations. Okay. And so the book is the story of my 2 strokes, the most recent ones. And I like to call it the story of the year that I was supposed to die, but somehow managed to live through. Because the second and third stroke, again, the doctor said I wasn't expecting to live past a year, but I made it. And so I'm telling that story, but I'm telling it through me talking to Philomena and being like, yo, like I'm dealing with a lot. This is what I'm going through. And Philomena being like, oh, like trying to support me and also telling me what she's going through. And so it was a very interesting thought experiment to see like, how would the way that I move through the world be different if I was born as Philomena, as the girl that I was supposed to be, you know, because like, granted, I have a bunch of trials and tribulations, a bunch of marginalizations, etc., but I'm still a man, and I'm still like, you know, like massively privileged in that regard. Like I can, you know, like walk down a street and like people are afraid of me because I'm black man, but people aren't, you know, like going out of their way to harass or attack me, you know. And like I like move through the world with a ridiculous amount of male privilege, which like women don't, and which like my sisters don't, my friends don't, like my mom doesn't, etc. And so, and like also like the ways that like society like grooms women differently than they do men, and like women are like pushed into like caring, you know, like nurses and caretaker, you know, like that sort of career, you know, like versus like the man who's like, you know, do whatever you want to do, like, you know, just live your best life, you know.
It's well, first of all, like just the whole concept. I remember when you first when we first met, and I think you were mentioning it when you were doing your feature set at Shabeshar. I'm like, wow, that first of all, the book cover was already like, okay, sold. But the conceptually is just, it's so interesting. And I think it's an honest conversation to have, right? Because I don't know why people struggle with this whole privilege thing so much. There's some buzzwords today that quite honestly, I don't really care about. Like intersectionality is actually this word I kind of don't like that word. Okay. I understand what it means. I get it, but I feel like it's a buzzword that's now being used to convey something.
I see what you mean. Yeah, like with the original meaning and the original, like, you know, onus behind the word means very different from like the way people are just throwing around intersectionality these days.
It's token it's token wokeness, right? Like outside of criticizing words like woke, I hate the word woke. I don't like intersectionality, and personally, I'm going on record, I hate the term racialized. That I just I don't get what it conveys that other words don't. But men and women have very different experiences.
Very different.
Full stop. There's just there's no two ways about that. Now, I find that it shows up in so many places that we don't even necessarily think about subliminally. I think one of the most profound realizations I had about this specifically was I was at a Shoppers Drug Mart. This is some years ago, one nearby, and they had a really wide magazine rack. So it was like a long shelf and then 2 shelves like kind of on either side at 90 degrees. And I just kind of stepped back and I'm looking at it left to right, over and over, and I'm like, what am I seeing here? There's something that's odd about this. And then I just grabbed my phone and I just kind of panned my camera across it. And then as I was doing that, I realized what it was. In the way that they'd organize a shelf, it's women on the left, men on the right. And you go on the left, from the very far left, you have like the really trashy magazines like the Examiner and whatnot. Like just complete junk food for the mind in every conceivable way. Then you would get into, somewhat less trashy magazines. Then you start getting into like the Cosmos and the Vogues and whatnot. And then you start to see this transition into House and Garden and Home and whatnot. And then there's this weird gray area where there's House and Garden and then there's like boats or planes, right? And now you can see the gradation going from what is female to male. So you go from like boats to like hunting to like, whatever, gun life or whatever it might be. And then eventually you get into the Time magazines, you get into the Walrus and all of these. And then there's Men's Health and then Maxim and all this stuff. And then it descends into like WWE madness. But so I step back and I'm like, okay, wait a second. What I see on the shelf here is the contrived representation or narrative that society wants of men and women, right? That we all kind of agree to, whether we think it or not. And if you look at the intelligent stuff, I mean, keep in mind, this is going back probably about 6 or 7 years. I think it's a little bit different now. But the intelligent stuff, whether it was the news, the politics, the popular mechanics, all of that stuff, even if it wasn't some jacked up dude on the cover, it was sitting in the section that is very clearly on the men's side of this rack. And so I thought to myself, all of the good stuff that is even remotely intelligent and useful is sitting in the domain of men. All of the stuff that we're giving women is not necessarily negative, right? Because there's some good stuff, right? But it's not the decision makings over the future of the world. It's not science. It's not all of these different things. And then it kind of it hit me that the society, I believe, conspires to keep women from reaching their potential. Because if you put, a group of boys and a group of girls like out on the same playing field with all the same opportunity, individuals will rise and fall, but there's really no difference. You're seeing a lot of professions where women are starting to not only outperform men, but out-index men and whatnot.
But still
given
making
the opportunity.
less.
Yeah, and still making less. And so I was thinking about that, and then, a few years later, I have a daughter, and now I'm thinking, what do I want her to see of the world? What do I want the world to be like? And I'm not the architect of all that. I can't control everything that's in the environment, but at least I can try my level best. My wife can try her level best. We can give her as many tools to face these things as she can. Because, now having a daughter and a son, I can see how they play differently in the schoolyard. I can see how they interact with the world to some degree a little bit differently. And those experiences are only going to get exasperated at some point. And I want to be able to empower them. But it's hard for men to hear this, for a lot of men. They're like, I'm sick of hearing about women's rights. I'm sick of hearing about Me Too and all this stuff. Well, what about men? Like, men have it hard. I'm like, okay, yeah, some men do have it hard for various reasons. That doesn't mean that every woman's had the same chance that you've had because you're a dude.
Yep.
And I find these...
Honestly, like the same ways that like sexism and patriarchy, like insidiously affects women, it affects men in a different way too.
Yeah.
Like the fact that like not a lot of men feel comfortable around the kitchen, like that is patriarchy, like how many male friends do I know who don't even know how to cook a like meal for themselves, like that's patriarchy. Like how many men like don't know how to practice hygiene and grooming and like basic stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think we all carry it around too. Like I as much as I think I'm aware of this, every now and then you catch yourself with your own prejudices. Like there was a friend some years ago I met, and like we just met, and we're kind of hanging out and stuff. And I'm like, so what do you do? And he's like, I'm a nurse. And so my mom, she's retired now, but she'd been a nurse for 45 years.
Oh, my
right?
mom's a nurse too.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
okay. Shout out to all nurses.
Exactly,
right? Getting shit done. But so all the nurses save one nurse that I'd ever met that was one of my mom's colleagues, every one of them was a woman. And when he told me he was a nurse, I don't know what exactly I thought. Like, I was a little bit surprised. But I'm coming right out and saying, like, there's some prejudices in my mind about, like, you know, maybe thinking he wanted to be a doctor, but couldn't become a doctor, so became a nurse and all of these other things. And as soon as I caught myself doing that, I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, I know how hard my mom worked and how hard her colleagues worked to save lives and, you know, carry the load of a system that often doesn't give them the credit it should. So
They
like
work a lot harder than a lot of doctors.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And so I had to kind of undo that conditioning. And this isn't like, and this is, you know, from the son of a hardworking nurse, right? So you don't even know where some of these prejudices kind of play out. But I think all of us have these biases. I think we just have to be at least aware that we have these biases. And then when you
try our best to unpack and
come face to face with it and then shut it down, right? Or understand it. I think that it's really important that, like, you know, we as men actually have an opinion on this, right? Actually say something about it, right? So I'm just, you know, I feel better about the world when I meet people, like, you know, especially people as young as you are, right, doing this. And it's interesting because you were saying, you know, I feel very encouraged seeing somebody near 27, you know, like, what, maybe a quarter generation behind sort of thing. And I see a lot of promise there. And then you were saying you met someone else who was younger than you, and you kind of feel the same thing. So that kind of gives me hope.
There's definitely a lot of hope for the future. Because like my little sister is like so far beyond than I was at her age. But I know it's because I've always talked to her like she was on the same level as me, right? Like, she's 6 years younger than me, so she's 21. But like, since she was able to talk, like, I never treated her like a kid, you know? I was always like if you're hanging out with me, then I'm gonna talk to you like,
sure,
you know, like I would my friends of the same age, right? And so like, that's just made her like automatically like a lot more mature than her peers, like at all stages. And so no, there's a lot of hope.
I think, and that's the thing. I think we don't take kids seriously enough, right? Like, they are wise. Like most kids. It's come up a few times in conversations recently. Again, when I go pick up the kids from school, you know, it'll be kindness month, or it'll be like, you know, clean up the earth like week or whatever, and you'll see all these beautiful paintings of kids like cleaning up like garbage, or, you know, here's the 10 things you can do to be kind today and whatnot. I'm like, those posters don't belong here. Those should be in every office and public space where adults hang out, because we're the ones that need to remember this. These kids already got this stuff down.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the older we get, the more cynical we get. But I remember when I wrote Baby Girl for my daughter, which is just, it's a love letter to her, because I want her to just be her. Just you be you, do your thing, right?
I love that one, by the way.
Oh, thank you. But I remember when I was writing it, she's like, well, not so much when I was writing it, when we're shooting the video. She's like, why are we shooting this video? Why are you making this piece? I don't want to do this anymore. I want to play, right? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, because someday somebody's going to tell you can't do something because you're a girl. And 2 weeks later, sure enough, some boys at school.
2 weeks. That's how long it took.
2 weeks later, like literally 2 weeks later, she was at school. She was in the after school program. She's with a friend. They're hanging out and they're playing with some superheroes. And there's these two boys that are there, and they're like, what are you doing? She's like, we're playing with superheroes. You can't play with superheroes. Girls can't play with superheroes.
Wow.
And I'm like, so she's telling me this just kind of nonchalantly. And I'm like, and what did you say? She's like, girls can play with superheroes. Girls can do anything. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm glad you did that. I didn't make too much of it. But then later in the evening, I'm thinking, this is very innocent. It's just superheroes. But how in this city, in this neighborhood, which is as mixed as it is, with all the different kinds of families that are here, in this day and age, do kids at 5 come to this conclusion that girls do this stuff, boys do that stuff? And not only that, those boys would, I'm speculating here, they would think boys can choose not to play with superheroes. Girls can't choose to play with superheroes, right? And if boys are not playing with superheroes, it's because they choose. And this is, and I start to unpack that a little bit. I'm like, maybe it's not coming from their parents. Maybe it's coming from each other or stuff that they're watching, whatever it is. But like, these ideas are already forming in kids that young, who are spending time with each other. And so I told my daughter, I'm like, see, that's why I wrote the piece, right? Because like, someday somebody's going to tell you. And, you know, along the way, people have told her more stuff like that. And she usually just kind of ignores it. You know, I mean, I don't know if in my lifetime we'll ever get to a place where it's going to be fully everybody's on the same playing field, but we should aim for it.
Definitely.
We should try and make it better.
Definitely. And like, what does that do with kids for kids with like non-cisgendered, like kids who might not necessarily fit in those neat little boxes of, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, and identify as that. And then they're trying to like, figure out like, oh, like this is my gender identity. It's different from, like what mommy and daddy are, or what, like people are around me. Like if those kids like had more like examples and representation like of people who were like them, like that would like help tremendously. And like and like if the kids around them would like have that representation to be like, okay, they're different, but that doesn't mean you should bully them,
Right. That's actually something that Sangeeta, who's a CEO of LeVar Burton Kids, she'd shared with me. She's lived in a few different places. She grew up in America. And at the time that, we grew up, we just didn't see, like especially in kids' books, textbooks, whatever, you wouldn't see any character that was not white. Like, it would be very rare. I'd roll up to a Hallmark card store. I would never find Anuj like on a bookmark and whatnot. And this is not my little sob story. The idea is just that you don't see yourself represented. I get that to a point because, you kind of just show up in a place in a new society that wasn't ready for you. And now it's kind of, I think it's also ridiculous to expect that, in a country of a million Tylers that, Anuj or Mugabi should have a bookmark there. I think that's kind of ridiculous too. But if you never see yourself and you're forced to constantly identify with somebody who is not necessarily exactly like you, I think something gets lost there. So she's really made a mission, and LeVar Burton, through his company and his work, has made a mission that, especially in kids' books, are trying to introduce more diverse characters, right?
Like, weren't there kids who like have two moms in a book,
Exactly. Who have two moms or have some sort of, physical challenge or physical enhancement or wrestling with, their gender identity, whatever those things are. Because if you can't see yourself there, it's like you don't feel like you exist to the world, right? And then the counter argument is like, I hear like the story you're sharing about you and Philomena and that and wrestling with the things that you've wrestled with. Like, if someone's listening to this right now and kind of caught the podcast halfway through and doesn't know that you're black and doesn't know that you've lived all over the world and whatnot, it's just a human story, right? Why, when a character is white, it's expected that everyone's just going to identify with it, right? But as soon as a character is something else, you can't identify with that. Like, that doesn't make any kind of sense, right? This is a human story.
Yeah, straight up.
So I'm just I think I'm an eternal optimist who's also a little bit cynical, but I'm just constantly reminded by how beautiful and nuanced the world is when meeting people like you.
And like I come across as like incredibly optimistic. I have like learned from like the way like people respond to me. But like I never want my optimism to make it seem like I don't allow room for like grief and like sorrow and all these, and anger and all these emotions that are labeled negative but aren't really inherently negative,
right,
because like there's nothing inherently negative about being angry. Anger's a response to something, right? And anger is a healthy response. Like, it's how you express that anger that can be healthy or unhealthy or negative or positive. Like, if I got angry and I smashed this table right now, that wouldn't, like...
I'd make for an interesting conversation.
But it wouldn't be the healthiest or most effective use of my anger,
Right.
And like I was in therapy for like a year and a half when I was dealing with my strokes and everything. And one of the things that my therapist taught me was, he was like, why are you so like reticent to express your anger? He was like, anger is healthy. It's okay to be angry. You don't need to always like shrink yourself every time you feel yourself getting angry. And so I got a lot more comfortable with being angry, with being sad, with being like, with going through grief, and processing these emotions, because like, as much as I am happy and incredibly grateful for everything that life has given me, at the same time, life has like taken a lot away, and life still puts me through a lot on a daily basis. And so I just like to acknowledge that, like to acknowledge like, like it's not all roses and sunshine every day, 24/7. And that sometimes there's some things that you can't necessarily like overcome, because I feel like a lot of people see me as an overcomer. They're like, oh, you went through all these things and you overcame everything. And I did overcome quite a lot, but there's some things that I don't. Like right now, head to toe, my body feels like it's on fire. And that's something that I experience 24/7. That's something that I haven't overcome for the past 5 years, I may never overcome, and that I am managing. And I feel like I tried to like stress, like to like temper the optimism, positivity with like some things cannot be overcome, they can simply be managed, because a lot of people are going through a lot of crap where they don't want to hear like, oh, it'll get better, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily get better, but it gets different.
Do you find that you curb, let's take anger, for example. Do you think you curb, or at least used to curb that because of who you are as a person or family and cultural conditioning? Or do you feel that the world is not, is even less kind to an angry black man? Like how much, do you feel like is there external forces that you perceive on you that make you curb what you would otherwise do?
Definitely. Like in terms of publicly, I very, 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 very rarely publicly express my anger. Like if I'm in a public setting, I'm not gonna like be expressing my anger like physically or verbally, because being an angry black man means being a threat. Like there've been a couple of times where I've just been like, literally just walking down the street listening to music, and I'm seen as an angry black man, and I like get pulled over by the police and have a gun thrown in my forehead and be like, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I was just walking down the street, I was just going to go pick up some milk, like
white milk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. White milk. Maybe I should switch to chocolate milk next time.
I'm kind of, I have to wonder, I mean, this might not come out right. This is probably the best time in the last 500 or 700 years ever for black people.
Oh, yes.
And it's still terrible. Like, I mean, social media is kind of, it tends to amplify some things, but if that many cops are caught beating and shooting black people, if that many cops are caught holding a young family with young kids at gunpoint over a kid taking something from a store, if that many angry, vigilante white women are out there calling the cops on somebody just having a barbecue or whatnot, when it's on camera today, and there's every reason to believe that they're going to be spotted and outed. If it's happening at that extent today, when it's on camera, on the record, what was happening before? But I don't know what particularly a black man can do today in North America, probably, that is not cause for trouble.
There's nothing.
Guy hangs out at home in a towel, doesn't go outside because he doesn't want to cause trouble or get in any trouble. Cops will show up there. Cop, he's trying to help somebody, he gets in trouble, right? He's like, he's the victim of something, still in trouble. Like, look at his record, right? Or he was, there was that one gentleman that was shot on a bridge by this female officer, and I remember there was a news helicopter that was kind of hovering over, and one of the guys on camera as they're filming this, he's like, "Oh, that's a bad dude." This guy was he just happened to be a large man. He was like 6'4" and maybe 300 pounds or whatnot, but he's a black man. Being like getting out of his car, right, and being pulled over for nothing, right. I'm like, there's really not much you can do while being black today that doesn't draw some sort of scrutiny. And so I think that everyone else has we have an onus, as much as I think we have an onus in a country like this to also be supporting anyone who's struggling. We should be locked in arms with the Aboriginal community. We should be locked in arms with each other to not against each other, but to kind of uplift everybody. I find that in particular, like anti-black racism within the South Asian community and other communities, if it's affecting black people, is a non-issue, right? But the moment it affects us, then that's when people really kind of get worked up and they make it an issue, and then they start to campaign about it, and they call our MPs and stuff. But if you see somebody for their color of their skin getting harassed, that should bug you. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is. There was an Indian man, I think in his late 50s or early 60s, who was visiting family in the U.S. somewhere, in the Midwest, I think it was. He was just walking in the neighborhood. Didn't speak much English or anything. Dark skin. Someone in their home in the neighborhood saw him kind of walking up and down the street and called the cops and said there's this, scary looking black man out there. Cops showed up. One of them literally grabbed him. It's on video, and he grabbed him, picked him up, and essentially just like choke slammed him into the ground. This man who could barely speak English is then in the hospital and everything. So a lot of people were up in arms, like, how could this happen, right? That, this man is visiting his family, he's well-meaning and everything. So you saw some people within, like, the Indian community kind of get worked up about this. But the underlying problem is that
this happens to black
someone
people all
thought
the
he was
time.
black,
Yeah.
right? And it's not, he wasn't put in that position because he was Indian. He was put in that position because someone thought he was black. And that's a problem, right? Like,
That's a huge problem.
how are we okay with that?
I mean, it's the same thing like Sikh people face all the time because people think they're Muslim because people assume that a turban means you're Muslim, which is like...
Yeah, like, dude, like, when was the last time you met a Muslim person with a turban?
Exactly. But Sikh people always get all of this like harassment and bigotry and like hate against them because people think they're Muslim. And like a lot of my Sikh friends that I have, like, they really like empathize with the Muslim plight because they, like, deal with it as a like unintended side effect. But like that should be shifted to like a focus of like uplifting and like helping out like marginalized Muslim voices where possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had Jeff Pereira on the podcast a while back, and he's interesting just because he's got I told him the story that, like, when I heard his name, I thought he was from Goa, right? And then I heard later on that he was Sri Lankan. I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. The Portuguese were there. But I wasn't 100% sure. And then when I saw him, I thought he was black. And then, so, like, I went through this whole narrative in my head about somebody that I didn't even know. But, he's got his head shaved now. He's got a beard and whatnot. And he's just kind of, like, because racial phenotypic expression is fairly, you have brown people that look black, you have black people that look like they could be Middle Eastern, like, you can't tell for sure.
Definitely.
But he's just vaguely black and brown enough that everybody will mix him up at points.
Okay.
So he's lived to some extent, the life of a black man, at least in the outside world, and the life of a brown man. And, it's got its pros and cons on both sides, but it's just interesting how people, from what he was telling me, the way the world interacts with him, depending on what they think he is. I'm like, you're just a dude, right? And in his case, he's actually just he's a gentle giant who's just really pushing to, like, uplift the way men behave and us uplift ourselves and treat women better, treat each other better, right? Like, just be good men. That's his thing. Yeah, I know we're complicated. We're nuanced.
Definitely. Very, very much so. And so, like, that's why, like, I try my best to, like, not take up the conversation when it comes to arenas that I don't have necessarily lived experience in, right? Like, if you're talking about like feminism and women's rights, like, I'm gonna uplift as many like women as possible, like donate to any causes if I have any money, like, like do what I can to like help the agenda and the platform. But when it comes to issues that I can speak on, those I will speak on,
Right.
Yeah.
You've been very generous with your time. Where can people find out more about you, and what's next? What crazy new adventure that you think is completely uninteresting is coming up?
People can find out more about me via my website, which is recently launched and I'm really proud of, mugabibyenka.com. That's MUGABIBYENKYA.com. You can also follow me on Facebook. I got a Facebook page, and my personal profile Facebook page is at MugabsB. My Instagram is at Mugabs. My Twitter is at MugabsB. And in terms of what I have going on, I'm doing a little Ontario victory lap. And it's like celebration of the fact that like my book did well, and like just a little jaunt across Ontario, which is going to be fun. Up next, I'm working on a one-man play actually that I'm in a fellowship for right now. So I'm very excited about how that's shaping up.
Amazing. I'm a little surprised that Philomena doesn't have her own Twitter handle. That's honestly the first time that has been suggested to me. No, you heard it here first.
All right. I'll make sure to give credit where credit's due.
Mugabi, thank you so much. I look forward to having you back at some point. Definitely, if you haven't already read the book, you got to check it out. Everything behind the scenes about this man is as interesting as that cover, if not more. So, Mugabi, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate
we out.
you.
If you've listened till this point in the podcast, I can assume only one of two things. One, you really dig this podcast. You just love it and you can't get enough. Or two, you started the podcast, you got busy with something else or bored, you forgot about it, and it just kept playing on your phone or was playing over your speakers in your room, you left the room, and right now I'm just talking to nobody. But if you're one of the former and you're really loving this podcast, please help spread the word. There's a lot of ways that you can help support the podcast and what we're doing here with these conversations. Of course, you can subscribe to us on any podcast app or platform of choice. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn. If you really like what you're hearing, please help spread the word. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Definitely hit us up on Apple Podcasts, leave a review and a rating. You can also engage with us and suggest ideas for new guests and topics and conversations all over social media, on Instagram at AwokenWord Podcast, and on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, we're at AwokenWord. If you like what you're hearing, share it on social media. Feel free to bring up any of the conversations or topics we've talked about here in your own podcasts or your own conversations. So until next time, I'll see you again on Awoken Word. Peace out.